The posting was on the state's employment website for 3 weeks before I saw it. Seasonal caretaker Harwick House, town of Greylock, Vermont. Historic property maintained by the Division for Historic Preservation. April through November. Housing provided. $14.50. Hour, 30 hours. Week. Below that, a list of duties. Mowing, gutter cleaning, minor carpentry, visitor log maintenance, liaison with the Greylock Historical Society. And then, in a font size smaller than the rest, background check required. Must be comfortable with extended periods alone. That last line is what made me apply. I was 61. Dennis had been dead 14 months. The house in Montpelier, our house, the one we'd bought when I was still teaching 3rd grade, and he was still driving fuel oil trucks for Champlain Valley Energy, had become a kind of machine for producing silence. I'd stand in the kitchen at 6 in the morning with the coffee maker going and the refrigerator humming and the baseboard heaters ticking, and the silence would still somehow be louder than all of it. I didn't want to leave the state. I didn't want to move closer to my daughter in Burlington, because Julie had 3 children under 8 and a husband who worked nights at the hospital, and the last thing she needed was her mother arriving with a suitcase and a face full of need. I wanted to be useful somewhere. I wanted walls that weren't mine to look at, so I applied. I interviewed over the phone with a woman named Carolyn from the Division for Historic Preservation, who asked me whether I'd ever maintained a property alone, and I said I'd kept a 4-bedroom house running for 36 years while also working full-time, and she laughed and said that more than qualified me. I arrived in Greylock on the last day of March, during mud season. The town sits in a narrow valley in the southern part of the state, not the tourist part, not the ski country, not the leaf peeper corridor. It's the kind of Vermont that people who've never been here don't know about. Small, tired, beautiful, in a way that asks nothing of you. There's a general store that also serves as the post office. There's a white clapboard church with a steeple that leans about 2 degrees to the east. There's a volunteer fire department and a town clerk's office that's open 3 days a week, and a free library in someone's converted barn. The population, as of the last census, is 412. The Harwick House sits at the north end of Main Street, set back from the road on about 1.5 acres of overgrown land. It is, as these things go, a modest example of what the state considers worth preserving. A connected farmhouse in the old New England style, the kind Thomas Hubka wrote about big house, little house, back house, barn, each section built in a different decade, all of them connected, so you never had to go outside in winter. The big house dates to 1794. The barn is from the 1830s. Everything in between was added piecemeal by a family named Harwick that occupied the property continuously from the founding of the town until 1961, when the last Harwick, a woman named Edith, never married, who'd been the town librarian for 40 years, died in the downstairs bedroom and left the property to the state with a 1-paragraph will. Carolyn from the division met me at the house on the morning of April 1st. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 35, with the kind of brisk competence that made me feel simultaneously reassured and slightly judged. She walked me through all 4 sections. The big house had been partly restored. Original wide plank floors, a keeping room with a fireplace you could stand inside, period-appropriate wallpaper in the parlor that was peeling in one corner. The little house connected to the back and served as the caretaker's quarters, a small kitchen, a bathroom with a clawfoot tub, a bedroom with a window overlooking the meadow behind the property. The back house was storage, storm windows, paint cans, a riding mower from the Clinton administration. The barn was empty and beautiful and cold. Then we went upstairs. The big house had a full 2nd floor, 4 rooms, mostly empty, used during the summer for small exhibits when the Historical Society organized tours. At the end of the upstairs hallway, a narrow staircase rose to the attic. We climbed it. The attic was long and dim, running the full length of the big house, with exposed rafters and wide board flooring and the kind of trapped, cedar-scented air that makes you feel like you've stepped out of the current century. At one end, under the eaves, was a door. It was a proper door, not a hatch or a panel, but a 6-panel pine door, painted the same gray-blue as the rest of the attic trim. It had a brass knob and a keyhole and a sliding bolt lock that had been fastened from the outside. The bolt was old but not original to the house. Someone had added it later, maybe much later. The screws holding the bolt plate to the frame were Phillips head, which put it sometime after the 1930s. I noticed all this because I was looking at the door while Carolyn was talking about the roof. She was pointing out where the flashing needed attention near the chimney, and I was looking at the door, and finally I said, "What's in there?" She glanced at it. "Storage room. It's been locked since before I started." "Do you have a key?" "There should be one on the ring I gave you. The brass one." I checked. There were 11 keys on the ring she'd handed me when I arrived. 3 were labeled. The rest were not. None of them looked like they'd fit a lock from the 18th or 19th century. One was brass and small enough to be a furniture key or a jewelry box key, not a door key. "It doesn't look right," I said. Carolyn shrugged. "It's just old files and furniture, I think. Edith Harwick's things." The Historical Society inventoried the accessible parts of the house in the 80s, but I don't think anyone's been in that room in a long time. If the key doesn't work, we can get a locksmith out eventually. It's not a priority. "Can I slide the bolt?" "Sure, but the knob lock is separate. You'd still need the key." I left it alone that day. There were more immediate things. The furnace in the caretaker's quarters needed its filter changed. The gutters on the east side of the big house were choked with a decade of pine needles, and the riding mower turned out to have a dead battery and a mouse nest in the air cleaner housing. I spent my first week doing the kind of work I understood, physical work. Work that made my shoulders ache and my hands smell like rust and engine oil and gave me something to think about that wasn't Dennis or the silent kitchen or the fact that I'd taken a job paying less than I'd made as a first-year teacher in 1987. I slept well in the caretaker's quarters. The walls were thick and the windows were old, and the meadow behind the house was loud with peepers at night. I hadn't slept well in over a year. The town introduced itself to me gradually, in the way that small Vermont towns do, not with welcome baskets or formal introductions, but through proximity and repetition. I went to the general store every morning for coffee, and within a week, the woman behind the counter, Marjorie Hollis, who was also the postmaster and the chair of the library committee, knew my name and my order, and that I was the new Harwick house person. She was 70 and sharp, and had the kind of dry humor that could take you a full 30 seconds to realize had been deployed against you. "You're the one living in Edith's house," she said on my third morning. "I'm the caretaker." That's what I said. Through Marjorie, I met her husband Roy, who was 82 and largely deaf and sat on a bench outside the store every morning regardless of weather. Through Roy, I met Tom Gervais, who was on the select board and also ran the excavation business that had done the town's roadwork since the 1970s. Through Tom, I met his daughter-in-law, Nessa Gervais, who taught at the Consolidated Elementary School in the next town over, and who, when she learned I'd been a teacher, looked at me with the particular expression of someone who has found a resource. "We're losing the after-school program in June," she said. "Budget vote failed at town meeting. If you know anyone who wants to volunteer with kids 2 afternoons a week." "I might know someone," I said. "You don't have to decide now." "I'm deciding now." She smiled. It was the first time in 14 months that I'd felt like I'd made someone's day better instead of worse, and the smallness of that gift was so disproportionate to the feeling it produced that I had to look away. By the end of April, I had a routine. Mornings at the Harwick house doing maintenance. Afternoons twice a week at the school. Other afternoons walking the property, pulling invasive bittersweet off the stone walls, painting where paint was needed. I kept a logbook for the division, as required. I attended a select board meeting because Marjorie told me I should. "You live here now, even if it's temporary. And in Greylock, if you live here, you show up." And I sat in the back of the town clerk's office with 11 other people and listened to an hour of discussion about whether to pave the upper section of Quarry Road or whether the gravel was adequate for another year. It was at that select board meeting that I first heard the name Pierce. Tom Gervais was presenting the road budget. He was a large man in his 60s, methodical, the kind of person who brought printed spreadsheets to a meeting of 11 people, and I liked him immediately for it. He was explaining that the quarry road work would require an easement renewal from the adjacent property owner. And the adjacent property owner was, he checked his spreadsheet, the Pierce parcel, Lot 47. A silence. Not a dramatic silence. Not the kind of silence that would have registered to me as significant if I hadn't been a school teacher for 33 years, and therefore professionally attuned to the particular quality of a room full of people who have all simultaneously decided not to say something. It lasted about 2 seconds. Then Marjorie, who was sitting in the front row, said, "That's Donna's land." "It's the Pierce family land," Tom said. "Donna has use of it. Donna lives on it. Donna lives in a trailer on it. The deed situation is what it is, Marjorie. The deed situation is that she's been there 23 years. And the deed situation is that the land was never formally transferred after Carol died." Tom said this without heat, like he was reading weather data. "I'm not relitigating this tonight. I'm saying we need the easement renewed, and we need to know who has the standing to grant it." The select board chair, a younger woman named Beth Kowalski, who also ran the daycare out of the church basement, moved them to the next agenda item. But I watched the room while she did it. I watched Marjorie's jaw set. I watched Tom's deliberate return to his spreadsheet. I watched 2 people in the second row exchange a look that contained an entire conversation. I couldn't read. After the meeting, walking back to the Harwick house in the late April dark, I realized I'd forgotten all about the locked room in the attic. I want to explain something about how I experienced the first 2 months in Greylock, because it matters for everything that came later. I was not investigating anything. I was not curious in the way that leads to trouble. I was a widow learning how to occupy space again, without apologizing for it. The town was teaching me how to do that, and it was teaching me without appearing to teach me, which is the only kind of teaching that works on anyone over the age of 12. Every morning, Marjorie sold me coffee and told me something about the town. Not gossip information, the Harwick family history. The granite quarry that had operated from 1840 to 1920 and given the town its one period of prosperity, the flood of 1927 that had wiped out the lower road. The way the school had consolidated with Dunstan in 1998 and what that had done to the town's sense of itself. She spoke about Greylock the way a doctor speaks about a patient she's been treating for decades, with precision, with affection, with an awareness of chronic conditions that were being managed rather than cured. She did not talk about the Pierce family. I noticed this absence the way you notice a tooth that's been pulled not by seeing the gap, but by feeling your tongue go to a place where something used to be. It was Nessa Gervais who told me. We were in the school gymnasium on a Tuesday afternoon in early May, setting up for the after-school program, and I'd asked her a question about the select board meeting, just casually, just because the silence in the room had stayed with me. She was laying out art supplies on a folding table, and she stopped and looked at me and said, "How much do you want to know?" "I don't want to pry." "It's not prying. It's public record, most of it. But it's a thing that happened here, and people have feelings about it, and depending on who tells you, you'll get a different version." "Then tell me yours." Nessa sat down on the edge of the table. She was about 30, with dark hair and the kind of face that was more interesting than pretty sharp angles, a nose that had been broken once, eyes that looked at you like she was already 2 sentences ahead in the conversation. "Carol Pierce," she said, "Donna's husband. He died in 2014. He was a good man by most accounts. Worked at the quarry when it was still doing some small batch architectural stone, then drove truck for various companies after it closed. Donna and Carol had the land on Quarry Road, 22 acres, which is a lot for this valley. They had 3 kids. Their oldest, Tyler, got into pills in his early 20s. Oxy, then heroin, then whatever was available. It ate the family the way it eats every family. Carol spent the last 10 years of his life trying to hold things together. Donna worked at the school she was a teaching aide. I overlapped with her for 2 years before she had to stop. Had to stop? Tyler's kids. He has 2 girls. When he went to prison in 2016, they were 4 and 6. Donna took them. Kinship care. There was no one else Tyler's girlfriend was using too. Donna's other 2 kids had moved out of state by then. It was just her and the girls on the quarry road land. And the deed? Carol never made a will. The land was in his name, some old family thing, the way it was passed down. When he died intestate, it should have gone through probate, but Donna was overwhelmed. She was 60 years old and raising 2 small children on a teaching aide's retirement and whatever kinship care payments the state provided, and she didn't have a lawyer, and she didn't file the paperwork. For a few years, nobody cared. The taxes got paid, Donna paid them, but the title was never cleared. And now someone cares. Nessa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Carol had a brother, Dale. He lives in New Hampshire. They weren't close. Dale never came to the funeral. But last year, Dale hired a lawyer and filed a claim on the property. As Carol's surviving brother, with no will and no living parents, he has a legal claim to a share of the estate. Maybe the whole thing, depending on how the court reads the state's intestacy laws. Can he do that? He's doing it. The probate case is active, and in the meantime, the town can't renew the easement on Quarry Road because nobody can definitively say who owns Lot 47. And Tom needs that easement for the roadwork. And Donna needs the land because she has nowhere else to go, and she's raising 2 girls who've already lost every stable thing in their lives once. The children were starting to arrive. I could hear them in the hallway. Small voices, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, the particular acoustic chaos that 9 children under 10 produce in an enclosed space. Nessa stood up and smoothed the front of her shirt and said, "That's my version. If you ask Tom, he'll tell you it's a legal matter, and feelings aren't relevant. If you ask Marjorie, she'll tell you Dale Pierce is a predator, and someone should drive to New Hampshire and explain things to him. If you ask Beth Kowalski, she'll tell you the town needs to stay out of it." What does Donna say? Donna doesn't come to select board meetings. Donna doesn't come to much of anything anymore. She's tired, Ellen. She's been tired for a long time. I opened the locked room on May 9th. I want to state this plainly, because the expectation I've built, the expectation the title of this account creates, is that the locked room contains something terrible, something supernatural, something that will become the engine of a horror story. It doesn't. I need you to understand that the locked room is not the point. The locked room is what I thought the story was about before I understood what the story was actually about. Here's what happened. I was in the attic sweeping. The pine floor accumulated a fine gray dust that seemed to materialize from the air itself, and I'd gotten into the habit of sweeping it once a week because the work was meditative and the attic was the most beautiful room in the house. The long space under the ridge beam, the light coming through the small windows at each gable end, the smell of old wood. I swept my way to the locked door, and I looked at it, and I thought, Carolyn said it was old files and furniture. I am the caretaker of this house. It is reasonable for me to know what is in all the rooms of a house I am responsible for maintaining. The bolt slid easily. The knob was locked, as Carolyn had said. The brass key on my ring didn't fit. But the lock was old, a simple warded mechanism, the kind that a flat piece of metal will defeat if you know what you're doing. And I knew what I was doing, because Dennis had taught me. Dennis could open anything. He'd grown up in a family that couldn't afford locksmiths, and he'd carried that knowledge the way other men carry sports statistics uselessly, happily, until the one moment it mattered. I used a palette knife from the art supplies I kept for the after-school program. I felt the wards give. The knob turned. The door opened. The room was small, maybe 8 by 10 feet, tucked under the eaves on the north side of the house. It had one window, dirty, looking out over the front yard toward Main Street. The ceiling sloped sharply. Along one wall, a wooden shelf held about 24 cardboard boxes, each labeled in a handwriting I didn't recognize. Small, precise, clearly feminine. The labels said things like Town Records, 1,794, 1,820, Tax Assessments, 1,861,885, Vital Records, 1,900, 1,935, Land Transfers, 1,821, 1,860, Select Board Minutes, 1,931,961. 1. That last box stopped me. The other wall held a small writing desk, the kind sometimes called a lady's desk, with a slanted top and a single drawer. On the desk was a ledger book, closed, with a cloth cover. Beside it, a fountain pen in a tray, a pair of reading glasses with wire frames, a teacup, empty, with a brown ring inside where the tea had evaporated to nothing decades ago. It looked like someone had gotten up from working and left the room intending to come back. Edith Harwick had been the town librarian for 40 years. She had never married. She had lived alone in this house from 1940, when her father died, until her own death in 1961. And she had apparently spent some portion of that time in this attic room, going through the accumulated paper records of the town of Greylock records that had been stored in the Harwick house because the town had never had a proper vault, and the Harwick family, as one of the founding families, had served as unofficial custodians of the town's paperwork since the 18th century. I opened the ledger on the desk. It was Edith's handwriting, the same small, precise script as the box labels. She'd been making an index, a careful, methodical, cross-referenced index of every document in the boxes, organized by date and type and family name. She'd gotten partway through. The index covered the boxes from 1,794 to about 1,885. The remaining boxes were not yet indexed. She'd died, apparently, before finishing. I sat down in the small wooden chair at the desk, and I looked at the teacup and the reading glasses, and I thought about Edith Harwick, alone in this room, year after year, doing this work that no one had asked her to do, and that no one, after her death, had continued. The bolt on the outside of the door suggested that someone, maybe the state, maybe the Historical Society, maybe just whoever closed the house up after Edith died, had looked in, seen old boxes, and locked the door against nothing more sinister than dust and mice. I reported the room's contents to Carolyn the next day. She was mildly interested. She said she'd make a note in the property file, and that the Historical Society might want to take a look at the records at some point. She asked me not to move anything. I didn't move anything, but I went back. I went back the next day, and the day after that. I sat at Edith's desk, and I opened the boxes she hadn't indexed, and I started to read. I need to tell you what it's like to read a town's records from the beginning. Not the official history, the kind that gets printed on the sign outside the general store, the kind that lists founding dates and notable events, the actual records. The tax assessments and land transfers and vital records and select board minutes and correspondence and petitions and complaints. The handwriting of 8 generations of town clerks, some beautiful and some barely legible, some in iron gall ink that has faded to brown, and some in pencil that you can barely distinguish from the aging of the paper itself. It's like watching a body from the inside. You see the skeleton first, the survey lines, the lot numbers, the original land grants. Then the muscle and sinew, who bought what from whom, who married whom, who was born and who died. Then the nervous system, the disputes, the petitions, the arguments at town meeting, recorded in handwriting that gets larger and less controlled when the clerk was angry. Then the circulatory system, the money, who paid taxes and who didn't, who was assessed at what value, where the wealth was, and where it moved. Greylock had been founded in 1786 by 6 families. The Harwicks were one of them. The Pierces were another. I didn't go looking for this. I want to be clear about that. I was not investigating the Pierce family's land claim. I was reading records from the 1700s, for the simple pleasure of reading them, because Edith Harwick had organized them and left them for someone to find, and I was the someone, and the work was absorbing in a way I needed. But when you read a town's complete records, you can't help learning the town's complete story. And the story of Greylock, like the story of most small towns, was largely a story about land. The Pierce family had been granted Lot 47, the same Lot 47 on Quarry Road in the original 1786 survey. 240 years of continuous occupation. I found the grant document in the second box, written on rag paper in a clerk's hand, so formal it looked typeset. The grant specified 22 acres, the same acreage Nessa had mentioned. It had been in the Pierce family since the founding. Not the Harwicks, not the town, the Pierces. But here's what else I found. In the land transfer records from 1843, there was a transaction between Josiah Pierce and the town of Greylock. Josiah had sold a strip of land along the eastern boundary of Lot 47 to the town, for the purpose of, I'm quoting the document, the establishment and maintenance of a public road in perpetuity. The price was $12. The deed of sale included a description of the strip, roughly 16 feet wide, running the full north-south length of the lot. This was the original Quarry Road easement. The word perpetuity is important. In 1843, Josiah Pierce didn't grant the town an easement, a temporary permission to use the land. He sold the strip outright. The town owned that 16-foot strip. It wasn't a right-of-way that needed renewal. It was town property. I checked the records carefully. There was no subsequent transfer back, no reversal, no amendment. The 1,843 deed of sale had simply been forgotten, or misfiled, or ignored. At some point, the town's institutional memory had shifted, and the strip had begun to be treated as an easement, a permission, rather than as town-owned land. The annual easement renewals that Tom Gervais was talking about at the select board meeting were renewals of something that didn't need to be renewed, because the town already owned it. This mattered for Quarry Road. Tom didn't need anyone's permission to do the road work. The town owned the road strip. But that wasn't the part that kept me awake that night. The part that kept me awake was this. If the 1,843 deed was accurate, it also meant that the Pierce family's Lot 47 was 22 acres minus the road strip. The lot had been slightly smaller than everyone thought for 180 years. This was a minor discrepancy, maybe a third of an acre, and in most circumstances, it would matter to nobody. But Dale Pierce's probate claim was based on the property's assessed value, and the property's assessed value was based on the acreage. And the acreage, according to every document since at least the early 20th century, was listed as 22 acres. If the actual acreage was 21 2/3, and if that fact were introduced into the probate proceedings, it would mean the property had been incorrectly assessed for decades, which would mean the tax records were wrong, which would mean the title was cloudier than anyone already thought it was. In a normal situation, this would be a footnote, a minor correction. But in a contested probate with a brother trying to seize land from a grandmother raising her grandchildren, any additional cloud on the title was a weapon. For Dale Pierce's lawyer, it could be grounds to argue that the entire ownership history was unreliable, that the property lines were in dispute, that a full resurvey was needed, delays and expenses that Donna Pierce could not survive. Or, for Donna's defense, it could be evidence that the land had been continuously held and taxed and maintained by the family in good faith for 2 centuries, and that the discrepancy was the town's error, not the family's, and that Carol's effective ownership was established by possession and payment, regardless of the paperwork. It depended on who found out, and how they used it. I sat in Edith Harwick's chair and looked at the 1,843 deed of sale, and I understood why Edith had locked this room. Not with the bolt, someone else had done that, but with the work itself. She'd been indexing these records for years. She'd been a librarian. She would have found this. She would have understood what it meant in a town where the Pierces had been on that land since the founding. And she'd left the work unfinished. She'd indexed up to 1,885 and stopped. She'd stopped just before she would have had to record the discrepancy between the 1,843 deed and the later assessments. I don't know if she stopped deliberately. I don't know if she simply died before she got there. But I sat in her chair and felt the weight of a decision that might or might not have been a decision, and I recognized it as the shape of my own. I told no one for 11 days. I need you to understand the mechanics of this silence, because from the outside, it looks like concealment, and from the inside, it felt like something else entirely. I had found a document in a room I'd been asked to caretake, in a house I'd been hired to maintain, and the document was relevant to a legal matter affecting people I was coming to know. The responsible thing, the correct, obvious, procedurally clear thing, was to inform my supervisor at the division, inform the town clerk, and let the professionals handle it. But I'd been a school teacher for 33 years. I'd spent my career in rooms full of people with unequal power, and I'd learned that information, once released, does not go where you intend it to go. It goes where power takes it. If I told the town clerk, the information would become part of the public record. Dale Pierce's lawyer would find it. What the lawyer would do with it was outside anyone's control. If I told Tom Gervais, who needed the easement question resolved, he would learn that the easement wasn't an easement and the road strip was already town property, and that would solve his problem. But it would also open the acreage question, which would enter the public record through the same door. If I told Marjorie, she would tell Donna, because Marjorie was loyal in the way that older women in small towns are loyal totally, immediately, and without strategic patience. And if I told Donna directly, a woman I hadn't met, a woman who was raising 2 girls and fighting off her dead husband's brother and living in a trailer on land that might or might not be hers, I would be inserting myself into someone else's crisis with information that could help or harm depending on variables I couldn't predict. So I said nothing. I went to the store in the mornings. I mowed the lawn and painted the window trim and swept the attic. I volunteered at the school and watched Donna Pierce's granddaughters. I knew which ones they were now. A 6-year-old named Lily and an 8-year-old named Kayla do art projects with the kind of ferocious concentration that children produce when they're building something stable in a world that isn't. Kayla drew houses. Every session, she drew houses. Different houses, but always with the same features. A door, 2 windows, a chimney with smoke coming out, and a line of grass across the bottom of the page that extended all the way to both edges, as if she needed the ground to be continuous and unbroken. I watched her draw, and I thought about the 1,843 deed, and I felt the silence inside me change from something cautious to something cowardly. On May 20th, Donna Pierce came to the after-school program to pick up the girls. Usually a school bus brought them to the program, and a different bus took them home. But that day Donna came in person. She was a small woman, smaller than I'd expected, with gray hair pulled back and the kind of face that had been weathered into a permanent expression of endurance. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt and boots that were muddy from the unpaved part of Quarry Road. She stood in the doorway of the gymnasium and waited for the girls to notice her. And when they did, they ran to her with the particular urgency of children who are never entirely sure that the person picking them up will be the same person who dropped them off. Nessa introduced us. Donna shook my hand and thanked me for volunteering and said the girls talked about the art projects at home. Her voice was quiet and her handshake was firm, and she looked at me the way people look at strangers in small towns, with a preliminary openness that is also an assessment. "You're in Edith's house," she said. "Everyone calls it that." It was Edith's house. She was a Harwick, but the Harwicks and the Pierces go way back. My husband's grandmother and Edith were friends. They used to have tea together on Sundays. "In the house?" "In the house. Up in the attic," Carol's grandmother said. "Edith had a little room up there where she did her work." Carol used to joke that half the town's secrets were in that room. She smiled, not a happy smile, but the kind of smile that's a reflex, a muscle memory of a time when her husband was alive and the family joke was still funny. I felt the floor shift under me. Not literally. The floor was solid. But the ground of the conversation had changed, because now I knew something Donna didn't know I knew, and she was standing in front of me with her grandchildren holding her hands, and the distance between us was the width of a piece of information. "Would you like to see the house sometime?" I said. "If Carol's grandmother used to visit, you might like to see the room." "I might," she said. "Not today, but I might." She left. I stood in the gymnasium and felt the 11 days of silence resolve into something that was not silence anymore, but a decision I hadn't made yet. I want to talk about complicity, because I think that's the word for what I was living inside, even though it doesn't have the shape people usually give it. Complicity, in the stories I grew up reading, is dramatic. It's the moment you choose to look away from the crime. It's the lie you tell to protect the guilty. It's a single, identifiable action or inaction that you can point to afterward and say, "There, that's where I failed." But the complicity I was practicing was softer. It was the complicity of belonging. I had been in Greylock for 7 weeks, and I was no longer a stranger. Marjorie saved a cinnamon roll for me on Thursdays. Roy waved to me from his bench. Tom nodded to me at the second select board meeting I attended. Nessa texted me photos of the kids' art projects with notes like, "Kayla asked if you'd be there Tuesday." I was woven in. Not deeply. The weave was loose, preliminary, the kind that a sharp tug could still unravel. But I could feel it, and it felt like something I needed. And the thing about need is that it makes you careful with the thing you need, in a way that can look like wisdom, but is actually just fear of loss. If I produced the 1,843 deed, I would become the person who'd been going through the town's records without authorization, which was true, though Carolyn had never explicitly told me not to, and who had found something sensitive and sat on it, which was also true, and who was now inserting herself into a legal and emotional crisis that was none of her business. I would become a character in Greylock's story rather than a background presence. I would have edges. People would have opinions about me. Some of those opinions would be negative. And the loose weave that was holding me in the world would tighten in some places and tear in others, and I would no longer be able to sit in the general store drinking coffee without being a person who had done a thing. I knew this was cowardice. I also knew it was accurate. Both things were true simultaneously, and neither one canceled the other. On June 3rd, I attended the third select board meeting of my time in Greylock. There were 14 people in the room, the largest attendance I'd seen. Beth Kowalski opened the meeting. The agenda was routine until item 6, Quarry Road Improvement Project Easement Status Update. Tom stood up. He had his spreadsheets. He explained, in his methodical way, that the town's attorney had reviewed the easement question and determined that without clear title on Lot 47, the town could not proceed with the easement renewal. The road work would have to wait until the probate case was resolved. This could take, he checked his notes, 12 to 18 months, minimum. Marjorie raised her hand. Beth recognized her. Marjorie stood up and said that the upper section of Quarry Road had needed work for 3 years, and that families up the road, not just Donna, but the Lessards and the Weirtannons and the Cheneys were driving on a surface that was destroying their vehicles, and that a child had fallen off a bicycle in one of the potholes last August. She said the town had a responsibility to maintain its roads regardless of who owned the adjacent land, and that punishing an entire road because of a probate dispute was not governance, but abdication. Tom said, without any change in tone, that he agreed completely, and that the problem wasn't willingness, but legal authority, and that if someone could tell him who had the standing to grant the access rights for the shoulder work, he'd have a crew there inside 2 weeks. Beth asked if there were other comments. A man I didn't know, 40s, red baseball cap, work boots, stood up in the back. He said his name was Gary Lessard, and he lived at the end of Quarry Road and his wife had gotten a flat tire from the road conditions twice in the past month, and he wanted to know why the town was letting one family's legal problems hold the whole road hostage. Marjorie turned around in her chair and said, "Gary, the family you're talking about is Donna Pierce, who babysat your kids for 3 years for free." Gary said, "I know who it is, Marjorie. I'm not blaming Donna. I'm saying the road is the road." Beth said, "We understand the frustration." Tom said, "The road is the road and the law is the law, and they're tangled together and I can't untangle them with a grater." I sat in the back of the room and felt the 1,843 deed burning in my knowledge like a coal in a coat pocket. The deed solved Tom's problem cleanly. The town owned the road strip. It didn't need an easement. It didn't need anyone's permission. The probate case was irrelevant to the road work. I could stand up and say this, and the road would get fixed, and the families on Quarry Road would be helped, and I would be the person who'd solved the problem. But the acreage question would follow. It had to. You couldn't introduce a document from 1,843 showing a land sale without also introducing the implication that the lot was smaller than assessed. And once that was in the record, it was in the record. It would be there for Dale Pierce's lawyer to find. And I didn't know, genuinely, couldn't predict whether that would help Donna or hurt her. I said nothing. The meeting ended without resolution. Tom packed up his spreadsheets. Marjorie left without saying goodbye to anyone, which I'd never seen her do before. I walked home in the dark, and I sat in the caretaker's quarters, and I called my daughter. "Mom," Julie said, "it's 11 o'clock. I know. I need to talk to you about something." I told her everything. The room, the records, the deed, Donna, the select board meeting, the silence. Julie listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting, which she'd gotten from Dennis. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Mom, why haven't you just talked to Donna?" "Because the information might hurt her. You don't know that. And she doesn't know that you know. And she's making decisions about her own life without all the facts. I'm trying to protect her." "No, you're trying to protect your idea of the right thing to do, which means you've decided what the right thing is without asking the person it affects." Julie was a nurse. She had her father's hands and her mother's tendency to decide what other people needed, and she'd spent 10 years in a profession that had taught her to recognize that tendency and resist it, and now she was using that knowledge against me with the precision of someone who'd learned it the hard way. "You're right," I said. "I know I'm right. Talk to her. Show her what you found. Let her decide." "What if she decides wrong?" "That's not yours to determine, Mom. That's what I'm saying." I hung up and sat in the dark and listened to the peepers and felt the particular pain of having a child who is smarter than you in exactly the way you most need. I invited Donna to see the house on a Saturday afternoon in early June. She came with the girls. Lily ran through the big house, touching everything: the wallpaper, the fireplace, the wide plank floors, with the intensity of a child who has not yet learned that old things are supposed to be observed rather than experienced. Kayla was quieter. She stood in the parlor and looked at the ceiling and said, "Our house doesn't have a ceiling like this." "Your house has other good things," I said. "Our house is a trailer. Trailers can be good houses." She looked at me with the flat skepticism of an 8-year-old who has learned that adults say things they don't mean and considered this an inadequate basis for trust. I respected her for it. I asked Nessa to come too, because I wanted someone else in the room when I showed Donna the attic, and because Nessa was the person in town I trusted most, not the person I knew best, which was Marjorie, but the person whose judgment I trusted, which is a different thing. Nessa arrived with cookies and a coloring book for the girls, and a look on her face that suggested she had guessed that this visit had a purpose. We went to the attic while the girls colored in the parlor. I showed them the room. I showed them the boxes. I showed them Edith's desk, and her index, and her teacup, and her reading glasses. Donna touched the glasses gently. the way you touch something that belonged to someone who was connected to someone you loved. Carol told me about this room, she said. He said his grandmother said Edith was writing the town's real history up here. Not the pretty history, the real one. She was making an index of the records, I said. She didn't finish. Nobody ever does. I took the 1,843 deed from the box where I'd found it. I'd put it in an acid-free sleeve from the school's art supplies, the only protective measure I could think of, and I handed it to Donna, and I watched her read it. She read slowly. Her lips moved slightly, the way people's lips move when they're reading language that doesn't belong to their century. When she finished, she looked up at me. This says the town bought part of our land, a strip along the eastern boundary, 16 feet wide, the full length of the lot, for the road. In 1,843. Yes. So the road is the town's road. The strip the road sits on was purchased outright, not granted as an easement. Purchased. Tom doesn't know this. Nobody knows this. Nobody's been in this room since Edith. Donna looked at Nessa. Nessa was reading over Donna's shoulder, and her face had the particular stillness of a person who is processing rapidly and not yet ready to speak. What does this mean for the road work? Donna asked. It means the town doesn't need an easement, I said. Tom can do the road work without anyone's permission, because the town already owns the road strip. The probate case is irrelevant to the road. That's good. Yes. What else does it mean? I told her. I told her about the acreage discrepancy and the assessment implications and the cloud on the title and the fact that Dale's lawyer could use it either way, and that I genuinely, honestly, completely did not know whether this document would help her or hurt her in the probate case. Donna sat down in Edith's chair. She was quiet for a long time. The window was dirty, and the light coming through it was the color of old paper, and she sat in that light, and she looked at the deed, and she looked at the reading glasses, and she looked at the teacup with its ancient ring of dried tea. Then she said, Edith knew. I think she might have, and she didn't tell anyone. I don't know that for certain. She might have died before she got to it. She was indexing chronologically, and she'd only reached 1,885. She was a librarian for 40 years. She had the records right here. She knew. I couldn't argue with this. The probability was high. She was protecting us, Donna said. The Pierces. She was protecting the family. She might have been protecting everyone. If the information was ambiguous, if she couldn't tell whether it would help or hurt, then keeping it quiet was a way of not doing harm. Donna looked at me sharply. Is that what you've been doing? Yes. How long have you known? Since May 9th. That's almost a month. Yes. She didn't say anything else about that. She didn't say I'd been wrong to wait or right to wait. She looked at the deed again, and she said, I want Tom to see this. If Tom sees it, it becomes public. I know. Dale's lawyer will eventually see it. I know that too. Nessa spoke for the first time. You should talk to a lawyer before you show it to anyone. Donna. I can't afford a lawyer, Nessa. You know that. Vermont legal aid. I'll make the call. Donna shook her head, not a refusal, but the gesture of a person who is tired of being the subject of other people's plans. I've been on that land for 23 years. My husband's family has been on it for 240. Dale hasn't set foot in this state since Carol's mother's funeral in 2004. I am not going to sit in a locked room with a piece of paper that says the truth and pretend I didn't see it, because maybe the truth is dangerous. She stood up. She put the deed, still, in its acid-free sleeve on the desk, next to the reading glasses and the teacup. I'll talk to Tom myself, tomorrow, and I'll tell him where I saw it and who showed it to me, and he can do whatever he wants with it. She went downstairs. I heard her collecting the girls, Lily's protests, Kayla's quiet compliance, the rustle of coats, and the thud of small boots. The front door opened and closed. Nessa and I stood in the attic room. You could have just told Tom, Nessa said. Weeks ago, the road would already be fixed, and the acreage question would already be in play. It's going to be in play now anyway. But now Donna knows first. She gets to decide how it enters the world. Nessa looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "My father-in-law is going to be furious." At me? At the situation. At the paperwork. At the fact that the town has owned that road strip for 180 years and nobody knew. He's a man who believes in correct records. This is going to offend him on a level you don't understand. End quote. Is he going to be furious at Donna? Tom's never been furious at Donna. Tom's furious at entropy. Donna's just in the way of the road. Donna told Tom the next day. I know this because Tom came to the Harwick house on Monday morning, June 8th, at 7:15, before I'd finished my coffee. He stood on the porch of the caretaker's quarters, and he didn't knock. He just stood there, visible through the window, holding a folder, waiting for me to notice him. I opened the door. He said, "Donna says you found a deed in the attic." I did. "Show me." We went to the attic. He read the deed. He read it twice. Then he took out his phone and took a photograph of it and said, "I need to take this to the town attorney. The original should stay here. It belongs to the state. It's in a state-owned building. I'm taking a photo. That's sufficient for now." He put his phone away. He looked at me. "How long have you had this?" "Since May 9th. That's a month." "I know. You sat through a select board meeting where I said I couldn't do the road work because of the easement question, and you had the answer in your pocket. I had a document that answered the easement question and complicated the probate question, and I didn't know how to separate the two. You're not a lawyer." "No. You're a caretaker." "Yes. Then why didn't you caretake? Why didn't you bring this to me, or to the clerk, or to anyone who could have dealt with it?" I looked at Tom Gervais, his spreadsheets, his methodical anger, his genuine investment in correct information, and I said the truest thing I could, because I was afraid that if I gave it to the system would use it for the system's purposes, and Donna would be collateral. Tom stared at me. Then he said, "The system is a town of 400 people, Ellen. The system is me, and Marjorie, and Beth, and Gary Lessard, and the Wirtanens. We're not a machine. We're neighbors." He left. I stood in the attic and felt the specific weight of a correction that was also a kindness, because Tom had not said I was wrong. He'd said I was wrong about who I was protecting Donna from. What happened next was not dramatic. I want to be clear about this because the shape of a story, the architecture of narrative, creates the expectation of a climax, a confrontation, a moment where the tension that has been building discharges in a single scene. That's not what happened. What happened was slower and messier and more human than that. Tom took the deed photograph to the town attorney. The town attorney confirmed that the 1,843 sale was a valid conveyance and that the town owned the road strip. Tom had a crew on Quarry Road within 2 weeks. The road got fixed. Gary Lessard's wife stopped getting flat tires. The children stopped hitting potholes on their bicycles. This part was simple and good, and I want it to be acknowledged as such, because not everything in this story is ambiguous. The acreage question was harder. The town attorney, a woman in Rutland named Patricia O'Willette, who handled legal matters for a dozen small towns in the region, advised the select board that the 1,843 deed should be recorded with the town clerk, and that the property assessment for Lot 47 should be reviewed. This was, she said, a matter of public record accuracy. She was right. It was also the thing I'd been afraid of. Nessa made the call to Vermont legal aid. An attorney named David Chen was assigned to Donna's case. I never met him, but Donna mentioned him to me in passing a few weeks later, and she said he was young and serious and had asked her questions about Carol that no one had asked her in years, not about the land or the will or the probate, but about who Carol was and what the land meant to the family and how long the girls had been with her, and what her plan was for them. She said he listened the way lawyers are supposed to listen, and usually don't. The assessed acreage was corrected from 22 acres to 21 2/3. Dale Pierce's lawyer, upon learning of the discrepancy, filed a motion to compel a full boundary survey. David Chen filed a response arguing that the discrepancy actually strengthened Donna's position. It demonstrated that the family had been paying taxes on more land than they owned, which showed good faith, continuous possession, and a relationship to the property that was based on stewardship rather than precise legal documentation. The probate judge agreed with Chen. I learned this in late August, when Nessa texted me a message that said simply, "Donna got the land." I was painting the barn doors when I read it. I sat down on an overturned bucket, and I cried in the way that I hadn't cried since Dennis's funeral, not from grief, but from the release of something I'd been holding so tightly that I'd forgotten I was holding it. I cried for about 3 minutes. Then I stood up and finished painting the barn doors because the paint was drying, and if you stop in the middle of a coat, you get lap marks. But that's not where the story ends. And if I ended it there, I'd be lying about its shape. What I haven't told you yet is what happened between me and the town, the real thing, the thing underneath the deed and the road and the probate case, the thing I came to Greylock to find without knowing I was looking for it. In late June, about 2 weeks after Tom's visit to the attic, Marjorie asked me to help with the town's 4th of July preparation. This was, as she explained it, less a request than an informing. "You're helping," she said. "We need someone on the pie committee who can actually bake." I joined the pie committee. It consisted of me, Marjorie, Beth Kowalski, and a woman named Helen Wirtanen, who lived on Quarry Road, and who, upon meeting me, said, "You're the one who found the deed." "I am." "Tom says you sat on it for a month." "I did." Tom's irritated about that. "I know." "I'm not. A month isn't long. Edith sat on it for 20 years. Helen Wirtanen was 78 and had the kind of moral clarity that comes from having outlived most of the people who disagreed with you. She baked a blueberry pie that was, without exaggeration, the best thing I'd eaten in 2 years. The 4th of July in Greylock was a parade of 11 vehicles down Main Street, a cookout in the field behind the church, and a fireworks display consisting of what Beth Kowalski described as whatever the fire department confiscated from people's garages last year and deemed safe enough to use. I sat on a blanket with Marjorie and Roy, watched the fireworks and felt, I want to be careful with this word. I felt placed. Not happy, exactly. Not healed, but located. Situated in a specific point, in a specific community, in a specific landscape, rather than floating in the undifferentiated space that grief makes of the world. In July, a family from Brattleboro stopped at the Harwick house for a tour. I walked them through the big house and told them about the architecture and the history, and when they asked about the attic, I took them up and showed them Edith's room and told them about the index. The mother, a woman about Julie's age, carrying a toddler on her hip, said she was trying to preserve the town's memory. She was. Did she finish? No, she died before she could. The woman looked at the unfinished index and the teacup and the reading glasses, and she said, someone should finish it. After they left, I went back to the attic and sat at the desk and opened the ledger to the page where Edith had stopped. 1,885. The next entry should have covered the period from 1885 to 1900. The box was right there on the shelf. I picked up Edith's pen. It was dry, of course. I went downstairs and got a pen of my own and came back and sat down and opened the box and began to read. I finished Edith's index on September 30th. It took me the rest of the summer, working an hour or two in the attic on days when the maintenance work was done. I indexed the remaining boxes, 1885 to 1961, the year Edith died. I found the moment in the early 1900s when the 1843 road sale disappeared from the town's working knowledge. It was gradual, not sudden. A new town clerk in 1907 had started a fresh ledger and simply hadn't transferred all the old entries. The road strip began appearing as town easement, by long-standing agreement rather than town property, by deed of sale. Nobody noticed because nobody checked. The institutional memory of a small town is a living thing, and like all living things, it develops blind spots and scar tissue and compensatory habits that look like truth until you examine them. I also found other things, small things, mostly. A record of a schoolhouse fire in 1912 that the town history didn't mention. A petition from 1,923 signed by every woman in the town demanding that the select board address the condition of the bridge on Mill Road, which was apparently an embarrassment to the female sex and a hazard to the horse. A note in the 1941 minutes recording that the town had voted unanimously to send a letter to President Roosevelt following Pearl Harbor, and that Edith Harwick had been asked to write it. Edith had written the town's letter. Edith had taught its children. Edith had preserved its records. Edith had kept its secrets. And Edith had died alone in the downstairs bedroom of a house that was too big for one person, and no one had opened her room for 60 years. I don't know what to do with that except to say it. In October, the division asked me if I wanted to extend my contract through the winter. The Harwick house had never had a winter caretaker. The property was usually closed from November to April, with the town keeping an eye on it. But Carolyn said the house needed someone year-round. And the budget had been found. And was I interested? I said I'd think about it. I called Julie. She said, "You've already decided." I haven't. Mom, you finished a dead woman's index. You joined a pie committee. You're calling me to tell me you're going to say yes, and you want me to confirm that it's okay. Is it okay? You're asking your daughter for permission to keep living your life. I'm asking my daughter whether she needs me closer. Julie was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need you to be somewhere that makes you real. You weren't real in Montpelier. You're real there." I accepted the extension. I told Carolyn I'd stay through the winter and into the following spring. She was pleased. She mentioned that the Historical Society had expressed interest in the attic records and that there might be a small grant available to properly archive them. She asked if I'd be willing to lead that project. "I'm not an archivist," I said. "You're a teacher who finished a librarian's index. That's close enough for a town of 400 people." November came. The property emptied of visitors. The trees on the hillside behind the house went bare, and the meadow went brown, and the light changed that New England light that gets low and sharp and makes everything look like it's been engraved rather than painted. I winterized the barn and the back house and sealed the windows in the big house and moved my operation to the caretaker's quarters, which were small and warm and had exactly the right number of walls. Donna came for tea on the second Tuesday in November. She brought the girls. It had become a habit, not regular, not scheduled, but recurring. She'd stop by after picking up the girls from school and I'd make tea, and the girls would explore the big house while we sat in the caretaker's kitchen and talked. Not about the deed, or the probate, or Dale. About Carol sometimes, about the girls, about the school, about the winter, which was coming, and what it meant to heat a trailer on Quarry Road when the propane prices went up in January. On that particular Tuesday, Kayla brought me a drawing. It was a house. It had a door and 2 windows and a chimney with smoke coming out. But the line of grass at the bottom, the continuous, unbroken ground line she always drew, had something new on it. A second building, connected to the first by a short line. A little house next to the big house. "What's that?" I said. "That's the other house," Kayla said. "Where the person lives who takes care of the first house." Donna looked at the drawing. She looked at me. She didn't say anything. I put the drawing on the refrigerator in the caretaker's kitchen, next to a photo of Dennis and a postcard from Julie. It's still there. Here's what I want you to understand. I was hired to maintain a government house in Vermont. There was a locked room in the attic. I opened it. Inside was not a monster or a ghost or a dimensional rift or a signal from something that wanted to consume me. Inside was a dead woman's unfinished work and a piece of paper that mattered to a living woman and her granddaughters. And the question the room asked me was not, "What is in here?" but, "What will you do with what's in here?" And the answer took me a month to arrive at, and I arrived at it wrong, and my daughter corrected me, and a man named Tom corrected me further, and a woman named Donna made her own choice about her own life. And the road got fixed, and the land was kept, and the index was finished. And I stayed. I stayed. Not because the house needed me. The house had stood for 230 years without me, and would stand for another 200 without me. I stayed because the town taught me something that I'd known as a teacher and forgotten as a widow. That the locked rooms in our lives are usually not locked because what's inside them is dangerous. They're locked because someone, sometime, decided that the thing inside was too complicated to deal with and easier to seal away. And the act of opening them is not an act of courage or investigation or exposure. It's an act of maintenance. You open the door because the room is part of the house, and the house doesn't work right with a room sealed off. Edith knew this. She worked in that room for years, opening the town's records the way you open windows in spring, not to let something out, but to let air move through a space that had become stale. She didn't finish. I did. Not because I'm braver or smarter or more dedicated than she was, but because I showed up 60 years later, and the door was there, and I had a palette knife, and nothing better to do with my grief than put it to work. Donna's on the land. The girls are in school. Tom did the road. Marjorie still saves me a cinnamon roll on Thursdays. Roy still waves from the bench, though he's slower about it now, and I worry about him in the cold. The house is solid. The barn needs a new roof. I've put it in the request to the division, and Carolyn says maybe next fiscal year. The locked room in the attic is open now. I keep it clean. I keep Edith's desk, and her glasses, and her teacup where she left them. I keep the boxes on their shelves, and the index in its ledger, and the 1,843 deed in its acid-free sleeve. Visitors sometimes ask about it, and I tell them the story. Not this story. The short version. The version that fits in a tour. The short version goes like this. The town librarian spent 20 years preserving the town's records. She didn't finish. The caretaker finished for her. The records are here, if you want to see them. The long version is the one you just read. The long version includes the month I said nothing, and the reasons I said nothing, and the fact that my reasons were partly wise, and mostly cowardly, and that the difference between wisdom and cowardice is sometimes just the difference between who benefits from your silence. The long version includes Kayla's drawing, and Dennis's hands, and Julie's voice at 11 o'clock at night, saying the thing I needed to hear. The long version includes the peepers in the meadow and the mud on Donna's boots and Tom's spreadsheets and Edith's teacup with its ring of dried tea. The long version includes the fact that I came here expecting to be alone, and I wasn't, and that this was not a failure of expectation but its correction. It's December now. The snow has come. The big house settles and creaks in the cold the way old houses do, talking to itself in a language of wood and stone and gravity. I sleep in the caretaker's quarters with the window cracked. Dennis always slept with the window cracked. And I hated it then, and I do it now. Because the things we inherit from the dead are not always the things that make sense. The cold air comes in, and the warm air goes out, and the house breathes around me like something alive. And in the morning I get up and make coffee, and go out to check the gutters and the furnace, and the barn doors, and the roof, where the flashing needs attention near the chimney. I take care of the house. The house takes care of the rest.